Dorian leaves the colony at daybreak. The wind, heavy with salt, sweeps across the wooden piers that creak beneath his steps. In his gaze, he carries the hardness of the new lands, a raw world where every child grows up among the waves and the fear of enemy fleets. He learned from childhood that the ocean keeps the secrets of the dead. The elders speak of treacherous currents coming from the open sea and storms born without warning. In these waters, the pirate king rules through terror. Dorian believes that this man destroyed his family. For as long as anyone can remember, the colony has lived under the threat of ships arriving from the east. The continent seeks to seize the New World for its rare wood and its natural harbors. The Free Fleet protects these wild coasts with modern ships designed to defy the winds and the enemy cannons. Dorian spent years watching those black silhouettes depart toward the horizon. He dreamed of joining them, not for glory, but for a rage that has consumed him since childhood. Hatred has served him as an education until it became his surest driving force. Today, he boards a three-masted ship of the Free Fleet. The indigo-tinted sails snap under the breeze. The vessel is equipped with rotating turrets and reinforced grapnels, an inheritance from the old independent pirates who forged a new navy in these uncharted waters. The sailors watch him in silence. They see in him a young man with a straight bearing shaped by the labor of the shipyards and by daily training. Dorian ignores their stares. He focuses on the sea, convinced that somewhere far away is the one he must bring down. He remembers the day his mother told him about his missing father. Her words had the hardness of storms. Dorian never sought to understand the nuances. For him, the sea has a single culprit. The Pirate King must die for justice to be done. When the ship raises anchor, Dorian feels the colony fade behind him. The ocean opens before him like an inevitable fate. He does not yet know that every wave carries a buried truth, and that his quest for vengeance will lead him far beyond anything he imagines. 25 years earlier, long before Dorian's birth, the Western Ocean was even more unstable than it is today. The sea routes were nothing but hazardous lines that only scientific vessels dared to follow. Maelis was traveling aboard one of them, unaware of the danger drawing near. The ship carried scholars from the continent who had come to study the deep currents. They sought to understand the sea in order to better control it. In those early years, the continent had not yet understood the true power of the pirate coalition, believing it faced nothing more than disorganized bands. On the morning of the assault, the sea was deceptively calm. The ship moved slowly, pushed by a gentle wind. Maelis watched the horizon without imagining that black sails were slipping across it. Those sails belonged to the pirates of the coalition, commanded by the Pirate King. When the shadow of the enemy ships fell upon the waves, the captain understood too late. The coalition used a brutal tactic inherited from the old privateers. It struck from downwind, taking advantage of heavy armored ships to crush all resistance. The scientific vessel was defenseless. The first shots broke the hull like ripe fruit. Panic spread across the decks as cannon smoke filled the air. Maelis saw her father struggle to protect the instruments and documents as if knowledge still had a chance to survive barbarism. The assault was swift. The pirates boarded without meeting any real opposition. They searched for treasures or information to sell, but found only a terrified team of scholars. The coalition had no mercy for the weak. Bodies fell into the sea silent and forever erased. Maelis was thrown overboard in the chaos. The sea seized her with terrifying coldness. Around her, the debris of the ship drifted like fragments of a world she had just lost. Her father vanished into the waves, and the cry she let out dissolved into the wind. Alone on an improvised raft, she drifted for hours. The sun burned her skin, and the sea seemed to want to drag her back to the sinking wreck. Maelis thought she would die there in that distant past, where fate had just broken, unaware that this day would change the entire history of the oceans. Dorian grew up on the harsh coasts of the New World, far from the conflicts that had ravaged the ocean 25 years earlier. The colony was young and exposed. built on virgin lands where the wood of primeval forests was used to construct ever faster ships. Children there learned early the harshness of existence. They were trained to handle rigging, climb masts, and survive sudden squalls that swept the horizon. The New World offered no gentleness. It demanded constant vigilance, as if the sea were testing the will of every soul. Dorian quickly stood out. His gaze remained fixed on the horizon, as if something were calling him there, day and night. The elders said he carried the sea in his blood, yet no one understood that this gaze was not born of dreams, but of anger. His mother spoke of his father with restraint. She mentioned a man lost in a brutal assault, a victim of the cruelty of the pirate king. These stories left a deep wound in Dorian. He did not see the sea as a free expanse, but as an open grave. The youths of the colony worked together in the shipyards and lookout posts. Dorian forged his strength there. The drills required carrying heavy loads, swimming against violent currents, and repairing shattered hulls after the frequent storms of the western coast. Each evening, he watched the ships of the Free Fleet return to port. Their reinforced hulls bore the marks of distant battles. The sailors told tales of clashes against the pirate coalition. Dorian listened without blinking, searching in every word for meaning to his hatred. His hardened temperament earned as much respect as fear. Some saw in him a future commander, but Dorian sought neither prestige nor an honorable future. He wanted only to become strong enough to join the sea, find the pirate king, and avenge a past he did not yet understand. It was at dawn during a training morning that he felt the call of the open sea become irresistible. The wind carried the scent of salt and danger. He understood then that his destiny did not lie within the colony, but beyond the waves, where the truth he had always pursued was hidden. Maelis had been drifting for long hours when the currents pushed her toward a rarely traveled zone. In these distant waters, only the small craft of independent pirates dared to venture. The sun was slowly declining, and the sea seemed intent on swallowing her into an irreversible silence. That was when a solitary ship appeared, gliding between the waves like a cautious predator. Its flag belonged neither to the continent nor to the coalition. It was an independent vessel, lighter and more agile, designed to survive without the support of any faction. Its dark sails caught the slightest breath of wind. Ilyan stood at the helm. He was accustomed to spotting debris left behind by distant battles. That day, his gaze settled on a fragile silhouette carried by the foam. He understood that she was still alive. The ocean did not often grant such a chance. They hauled her aboard with care. The deck smelled of tar and salt, the mark of ships that survive through speed and silence. Maelis opened her eyes to a world she already feared. She saw men with faces marked by exile and the poverty that accompanied their independent status. Ilyan watched the young woman with suspicion. Independents were often accused of crimes they had not committed. They lived on the margins, rejected by the coalition for real or invented faults. Helping a stranger from a continental ship could draw indirect reprisals. Maelis, still trembling, sensed this danger without understanding it. She instinctively associated these men with the executioners who had destroyed her world. In her fragile memory, pirates and coalition formed a single threat. She felt like a prisoner aboard an enemy ship, unaware that Ilyan himself had suffered from these same confusions. The sailors gave her water and tried to reassure her, but she remained frozen by fear. The ocean had erased her father and her future. The faces around her seemed to belong to the same chaos. Yet, this rescue marked the first thread linking her destiny to Ilyan's. Night fell over the independent ship as it resumed its course. Maelis, lying beneath a cloak, still did not know that this day would change the course of her life. In these waters, far from the great roots, a fragile bond had just been born, carried by the sea and by chance. The wind was rising over the colonial port when Dorian joined the ship of the Free Fleet. The dark wooden hulls vibrated under the gusts. This port was the beating heart of the New World, a place where young recruits mingled with veterans marked by decades of conflict. The captains of the Free Fleet, observed each volunteer with care. Their navy had been born from the despair of former independence. It used techniques from both continents, blending rapid maneuvers with modern artillery. Dorian knew this force represented the only protection against hostile fleets. On the main deck, the new sailors formed a semicircle around an old chest containing the ceremonial sabers. Each recruit had to touch the steel and swear an oath before all. This tradition recalled that the Free Fleet had been founded by exiles who had refused the tyranny of the pirate king. When his turn came, Dorian placed his hand on the cold blade. He thought neither of the colony nor of the glory some sought. He thought only of the absent face of his father, lost in the flames of an assault whose version he had repeated to himself since childhood. He declared that he would pursue the enemies of the colony to the edges of the ocean. This oath represented for him more than a military commitment. It was the culmination of years of silent hatred. The officers saw in his eyes a rare determination, forged far from the great cities of the continent. The sailors around him received his oath with respect. Some remembered their own departure, driven by survival or vengeance. The New World drew broken souls, or those too proud to accept the authority of the continent. Dorian naturally inscribed himself in this lineage of fighters. Far away, his mother knew nothing of his commitment. She tended the coastal crops and water reserves, believing her son still in apprenticeship. Dorian had not found the strength to explain his motivations to her. He feared she would disapprove of his desire for vengeance. When the sails were raised and the port slowly receded, Dorian felt a mix of fear and exhilaration. The world opened before him, vast and unforgiving. He did not yet know that this oath would lead him to confront not only his enemies, but also his own history. Maelis slowly recovered from her injuries aboard the independent vessel. In the days that followed, she watched the sailors with constant mistrust. Their worn clothing and precise gestures revealed lives spent surviving on the margins of the ocean, far from any official protection. Ilyan kept his distance, discreetly watching over the young survivor. He knew that castaways from the continent often saw independence as criminals. Yet these men were merely exiles, rejected by the coalition for faults sometimes invented by the powerful. The pirate coalition possessed a strict organization imposed by its king. The central power controlled the maritime routes and punished without mercy any form of independence. Crews like Ilyan's were neither allies nor official enemies, only survivors whom every faction considered undesirable. Maelis gradually discovered this reality. The sailors spoke of the injustices suffered by their people. They mentioned arbitrary executions, forbidden ports, and hunts led by the coalition to eliminate those who refused the authority of the pirate king. This violence revealed a truth she had never imagined. She understood that the assault which had destroyed her ship was not the work of independence, as she had believed. The coalition targeted everything that belonged to the continent. The maritime world functioned according to relentless codes, where the innocent were often caught in the conflicts of the powerful. Ilyan eventually told her the story of his own exile. He had refused a brutal operation ordered by the pirate king and had been condemned to flee. Since then, he lived between invisible borders, always pursued, always ready to vanish before the coalition tightened its grip. Maelis then felt a deep gap between what she had been taught and the reality of the ocean. The maps of the continent showed clear and orderly routes, but the sea itself obeyed older laws, shaped by fear, survival, and the will of a few tyrants. Each evening, from the deck, she watched the horizon with a mixture of dread and clarity. She was no longer a simple lost passenger. She was becoming a witness to a world her people had never understood. This truth of the margins would shape the choices that awaited her. The ship of the Free Fleet was moving toward the central waters. When Dorian faced his first confrontation, the sailors watched the surface carefully. These zones were marked by invisible reefs and treacherous currents that often served as traps for novice patrols. A shout rang out from the lookout mast. A pirate corvette was approaching, light and fast, its black sails worn by the sea. This type of vessel traditionally belonged to the coalition's scout crews. They rarely attacked alone, but sought to test the resistance of their opponents. The crew prepared in silence. The rotating cannons were loaded and grappling hooks laid out on the deck. Dorian felt his heart beating in rhythm with the waves. He had never seen war face to face, yet he had grown up believing that this moment would define his entire life. When the corvette drew closer, its agility struck Dorian. These ships were designed to skim the waves at high speed. Their narrow hull allowed turns impossible for the heavier vessels of the continent. The coalition had perfected this art over decades of maritime combat. The first shot shook the sea. The cannonball struck the hull of the Free Fleet without piercing it, but the impact echoed like a brutal reminder of the ocean's realities. Dorian felt his fear dissolve into an icy focus. He ran to the positions assigned to him. The sailors returned fire. The ship's cannons released a cloud of smoke that dispersed in the wind. The shot hit the corvette at the railing. A splinter of wood burst free, and the enemy silhouette lost speed. It was the first time Dorian saw a battle unfold before his eyes. The captain ordered the pursuit. The Free Fleet ship turned thanks to its reinforced sails. It caught up with the damaged corvette. A brief boarding followed. Dorian did not take part directly but observed every movement. He etched into his memory the swift violence that defined this world. When everything ended, the sea was silent once more. The enemy ship drifted slowly, neutralized. Dorian understood that he had just entered a new stage of his life. The blood spilled on the planks marked his first step toward the vengeance he had pursued for as long as he could remember. Ilyan's ship was approaching an isolated coast when Maelis finally regained enough strength to stand. She watched the horizon without daring to speak. The days spent aboard had revealed a world where every decision could provoke the wrath of the coalition or the continent. Ilyan knew he could not keep Maelis by his side for long. A survivor from the continent attracted questions and suspicion. The ports that tolerated independence lived in constant tension. They traded discreetly, always ready to erase their traces at the slightest sign of danger. Maelis discovered a shoreline where a few villages lived between secrecy and resilience. These marginal communities served as stopovers for banished crews. They blended traditions of the continent with maritime practices inherited from old pirates. Everything there seemed precariously balanced, as if a single breath could shatter the fragile peace. Ilyan suggested leaving Maelis in one of these allied ports. She felt a deep hesitation. She had nothing left to return to. The world she had known had vanished in the flames of the assault. She was nothing more than a survivor shaped by the sea and by loss. She understood that Ilyan was not an enemy, but a man hunted by forces greater than himself. His ship bore the scars of past battles and the marks of permanent exile. This existence inspired both fear and respect in her, revealing the harsh reality of the independence. The sailors spoke of waters controlled by the coalition, where every unaffiliated ship was relentlessly hunted. They also spoke of the continent's intentions, which viewed these distant lands as zones to exploit, rather than as refuges. Maelis perceived the complexity of a world she had judged too quickly. When the moment came to leave the ship, she hesitated. The port offered relative safety, but the sea now seemed bound to her destiny. She knew she was not ready to face alone the uncertain routes of the continent. Ilyan was becoming, despite himself, her only anchor in this divided ocean. When the ship returned to sea, Maelis stood aboard, silent. Their alliance remained fragile, built on mistrust and necessity. Yet, in that precise moment, she felt that her future would depend on this wandering crew that sailed on the margins of all laws. The Free Fleet's ship was moving across a calm sea when the crew gathered around an improvised fire on the deck. The sailors shared their stories, as tradition demanded. It was a ritual meant to strengthen cohesion before the zones, where the coalition scouts prowled. Dorian remained silent for a moment before speaking. He knew the crew was waiting for his story. The young sailor carried a growing reputation, built on determination and raw strength. The veterans wanted to understand what drove that dark gaze he kept fixed on the horizon. He spoke of his father's disappearance, His voice did not tremble. He described the brutal assault that had struck his home and the unjust death that had marked his childhood. In his mind, that event had defined his entire life. The Pirate King was not merely an enemy. He was the shadow that had governed every one of his decisions. The sailors listened in silence. Many knew the losses and sacrifices bound to the ocean, but Dorian's rage was something different. It seemed ancient and deep, shaped by years of labor, solitude, and memories that no one had ever challenged. The Free Fleet welcomed men and women who had fled the tyranny of the old factions. Some had lost their families in raids from the continent. Others had been driven out by the coalition. Dorian's story therefore resonated with painful familiarity, but also with a new unease. The captain watched the young sailor from the edge of the circle. He recognized in that hatred a powerful engine, but also a potential danger. At sea, decisions made under the weight of emotion could doom an entire ship. He knew that Dorian was walking a fragile line. When the fire died down, Dorian remained alone beneath the stars. He felt the quiet admiration of his companions, but no joy arose from it. Vengeance offered neither comfort nor warmth. It only reinforced the emptiness that had lived within him since childhood, an emptiness the sea itself seemed to sustain. That night, the crew understood that Dorian was not merely a promising young sailor. He was the heir to a hatred that might drive him far beyond the simple battles of the Free Fleet, and no one yet knew where that obsession would lead him. Since their departure from the marginal port, Maelis and Ilyan had been sailing through areas where maps lost their accuracy. These waters were known for their shifting reefs and capricious currents. The Independents used these territories as natural ramparts against the fleets of the great factions. Maelis watched Ilyan with renewed attention. His constant gestures betrayed a vigilance forged by exile. Each maneuver seemed calculated to avoid an encounter with the coalition. This world of fragile alliances and persistent enemies revealed a man ready to do anything to survive. As the days passed, Maelis increasingly understood the silent hatred that drove Ilyan. He spoke little, but every glance toward the horizon expressed a deep anger against the Pirate King. This tyrant had shattered his former life and torn from his crew any possibility of peace. When the ship stopped in an isolated cove, Ilyan finally shared his intentions. He did not dream of freedom or fortune. He wanted to confront the coalition to avenge those who had been taken from him. His determination resonated with Maelis's own pain, still marked by the attack on her ship. She found herself thinking differently. The world was no longer divided between innocents and pirates. It was shaped by forces that crushed the weak and imposed their law through violence. Her view of Ilyan changed. She now saw a broken man, not an executioner. The cove was a place once used by the old privateers. One could find traces of shelters, ancient supplies, and circles of stone used for lookouts. Their presence was a reminder that the sea carried the history of those who had fought before them, leaving behind fragments of revolt. That evening, beneath the darkened sky, Maelis became aware that a common purpose bound them. Vengeance was no longer an abstract concept. It was becoming a direction, a shared necessity. Ilyan wanted to overthrow the Pirate King. She wanted to mend the loss of her father. Their grievances converged. In the silence of the cove, a tacit agreement was born between them. They knew that this path would expose them to the coalition and the forces of the continent. Yet, for the first time since the shipwreck, Maelis felt a form of clarity. A seed had just taken root, nourished by anger and the sea. Aboard the Free Fleet ship, Dorian felt his place evolving. The days of training followed one another, and the sailors began to recognize in him a steady presence. The discipline of the new world had shaped his body, but it was his determination that truly drew attention. The officers observed his ability to anticipate maneuvers. During drills, he moved with surprising ease among the rigging and the sails. These skills recalled the maritime traditions of the first exiles who had founded the Free Fleet by blending their knowledge with that of the explorers of the continent. Dorian proved capable of leading groups of young recruits. He assigned tasks with an almost instinctive precision. His tone remained calm, but each order carried a natural force. The veterans noted this emerging authority, rare in a sailor so young and still marked by anger. One day, as the ship crossed a zone of unpredictable currents, the captain entrusted him with coordinating a complex maneuver. The sails had to be adjusted quickly to avoid being drawn toward the reefs. Dorian decided without hesitation. His judgment proved correct, and the ship continued its course without trouble. The sailors began to see in him more than a simple novice. They recognized in his movements the spirit of the first leaders of the Free Fleet, those who had stood up to the continent and survived the attacks of the Coalition. This silent heritage revealed itself in every action he performed. Yet behind this rise in responsibility, Dorian remained haunted by his objective. His new authority brought him no satisfaction. It was only a means of drawing closer to the Pirate King, the enemy he imagined at the summit of all the sufferings of his childhood. Each night, while the crew slept, he went up to the upper deck. He gazed at the horizon in the night wind, searching in the darkness for a sign of the ship he wished to confront. The vast sea seemed to listen to his silent rage, as if it already knew the end of the path. Thus was born the awakening of this future leader, not in prestige or glory, but in the cold determination of a young man driven by a past he did not yet understand. On this merciless sea, his name was beginning to circulate softly among the crew of the Free Fleet.
In the days that followed, Ilyan and Maelis sailed toward the most remote regions of the Western Ocean. These isolated territories served as a refuge for those the Coalition had cast aside. There one could find fragmented crews, living by fishing, smuggling, or old forgotten alliances. Ilyan knew these waters well. They formed an invisible network of secret passages, sheltered coves, and hidden villages. The inhabitants had developed a unique maritime culture, blending the traditions of the old corsairs with practices brought from the continent. Maelis discovered a world her people knew nothing about. Little by little, Ilyan sought to gather those who had suffered under the tyranny of the Pirate King. His story resonated with other tales of exile and betrayal. Some isolated captains had lost their crews. Others had been accused of imaginary crimes to serve the ambitions of the Central Power. Maelis attended these meetings with a mixture of caution and curiosity. She now understood that the Independents were not a uniform threat. They formed a mosaic of broken destinies, united by the will to survive and to resist. This diversity revealed a depth that the maps of the continent never showed. An old captain joined the group. His weathered hull bore the scars of several battles against the Coalition. He brought information on the movements of the Pirate King and described the internal tensions within the enemy fleet. This intelligence confirmed that a silent shift was already underway. In a bay concealed behind towering rocks, the ships began to assemble. The weary hulls floated side by side, forming an improvised flotilla. For the first time in a long while, some sailors regained hope for a different future, however fragile, however uncertain. Maelis felt herself becoming involved in this nascent movement. Her perception of the ocean was changing. She no longer saw only the violence of the assault that had destroyed her past, but also the possibility of renewal. At Ilyan's side, she became aware of the role she might play in this revolt. Thus, the first allies were formed, a fleet still weak, scattered, and without certainty. Yet it already carried within it the promise of a direct challenge to the pirate coalition. A new breath was sweeping across the ocean, heralding days when the Independents would finally cease to flee. The Free Fleet glided east, leaving behind the familiar waters of the New World. The sailors felt the atmosphere change. The winds grew drier and more violent. These regions were known for their sudden storms and for areas where ships vanished without explanation. Dorian watched the sky with constant attention. The clouds formed long, dark lines, announcing invisible tensions. The officers spoke of a territory disputed between the Coalition and the remaining old corsairs. Each route stretched like a thread between caution and boldness. Training intensified. The recruits learned to maneuver quickly under pressure, to face the gusts, and to keep the sails steady despite the jolts. The Free Fleet possessed ships more modern than those of the continent, but these innovations never replaced experience. Dorian felt strangely at ease in this preparation. Danger seemed to give him a new clarity. He understood the captain's decisions better and anticipated the crew's reactions. On this restless sea, his instinct took on an essential role, revealing abilities that no one had yet seen. Rumors of a great battle were already spreading. It was said that coalition patrols were gathering significant forces farther north. Maritime routes there were becoming true corridors of tension. Dorian knew that by drawing closer, he was also drawing closer to the Pirate King. Each evening, the sea seemed to announce an imminent conflict. The waves struck the sides of the ship with unsettling regularity. The stars vanished behind heavy clouds. The older sailors recognized these signs. They knew the ocean was announcing the arrival of a major storm. The captain gathered his officers to prepare the safest routes. Dorian did not take part in these decisions, but he observed every detail. He understood that their journey was no longer merely a strategic movement. It was becoming an unavoidable passage toward the zones controlled by the coalition. Then the ship seemed to cross an invisible line. The wind changed abruptly. The salt-laden air felt like a warning. Dorian felt his heart beat faster. He knew they were entering a region where the first clashes would be only a prelude to the war to come. In the shadow of an overcast morning, Ilyan's flotilla advanced cautiously. The Allied ships came from different regions but shared the same fragility. Their worn hulls recalled years spent fleeing the coalition. Maelis observed every detail, aware that they were nearing enemy lines. A scout spotted a dark sail in the distance. The alert signal spread quickly. It was a fast coalition vessel, accustomed to hunting marginal crews. These ships often served as the first line, tasked with detecting forbidden gatherings of independents. Ilyan ordered a tight formation. The ships drew closer, forming a compact whole. This maneuver came from old Corsair tactics that favored cohesion over brute force. Maelis understood that every movement Ilyan made was rooted in a deep knowledge of enemy methods. As the coalition ship approached, tension rose. Its black sails reflected the authority of a ruthless central power. The fleets of the Pirate King used speed to strike the weakest. They sought to scatter any attempt at alliance among the ocean's outcasts. The first shots rang out. The improvised flotilla replied with surprising precision. Ilyan's sailors, despite their limited resources, maneuvered with unexpected agility. In these gestures, Maelis saw proof that survival had shaped in them an expertise the continent had never acknowledged. The fight was brief, but intense. Coalition fire shattered a railing, but the flotilla formed a wall of sails and rigging. The independent ships took advantage of a lateral current to outflank the enemy. This maneuver allowed them to strike the opposing vessel's side and throw it off balance. The damaged enemy corvette attempted to flee. Ilyan refused pursuit. He knew other ships might be following. The coalition never traveled alone in these contested waters. Maelis understood that this restraint was not weakness, but clarity born of too many battles. When silence returned, the flotilla remained united. Maelis felt that this skirmish was only a first test. Ilyan's allies had held firm, but the road to their true objective was still long. The ocean would soon remind them that every victory on these waters carried a price. The sea had calmed after several days of navigation. Aboard the ship of the Free Fleet, the elders watched Dorian with renewed attention. His determination was impressive, but his dark gaze too often recalled young sailors who were lost in their own anger. An old sailor approached him during a night watch. The man had sailed under many banners and knew the consequences of a vengeance fed for too long. In Dorian, he recognized the same tension found in fallen captains who had led their crews to ruin. The old man spoke of the ocean as a silent judge. He explained that the sea sometimes delivered justice, but that it took more than it ever gave. Dorian listened without replying. Each word seemed to strike against the conviction he had carried since childhood, that of a single enemy to be brought down. The elder spoke of the mistakes made by those who confused courage with obsession. He told of leaders who had sacrificed everything they loved to pursue a man or a cause. These stories were part of the collective memory of the New World, passed down to prevent others from falling into the same traps. Dorian remained silent. He respected the experience of these sailors who had survived storms and battles, but no story could smother the pain he carried. For him, the ocean was not a judge. It was the place where his father had vanished, erased by the cruelty of the Pirate King. The old sailor understood that his words had not soothed the young man, yet he insisted on one essential point. He reminded him that the Free Fleet carried a fragile legacy built on collective survival. A misguided vengeance could endanger far more than a single ship. This conversation left Dorian unsettled. For the first time, he felt a crack in his certainties. The night wind carried a scent of salt mixed with unease. He did not abandon his quest, but the doubts sown by the elder took root despite him in a corner of his mind. The sea remained vast and indifferent, ready to teach its lessons to those who refused to hear them. Dorian knew he would continue forward, but he also sensed that the road to his vengeance would be more complex than he had always imagined. In the days that followed their first skirmish, Maelis and Ilyan shared more moments of calm. The flotilla moved slowly between rocky islets. These narrow passages required constant vigilance. Here, the sea formed a natural labyrinth that protected the fugitives from the coalition. Maelis watched Ilyan with a different gaze. She saw in him a man marked by loss and struggle, not a mindless pirate. Every gesture he made revealed a fierce will to protect his crew. This attitude contrasted with everything she had learned about men of the sea. Ilyan, for his part, perceived Maelis's inner strength. She was not merely a survivor. She adapted quickly to the movements of the ship, to the voices of the sailors, and to the dangers of the ocean. Her calm presence brought an unexpected balance to a life dominated by flight and combat. One evening, as the flotilla anchored in a small bay, Maelis remained on deck to contemplate the silvery reflections of the moon. The ocean seemed to breathe softly. For the first time since the assault, she felt a fragile form of peace. Ilyan joined her on deck in silence. They did not speak. The simple sharing of the moment was enough. Maelis understood that this calm also came from him. She discovered a sensitivity she would never have imagined in a man hunted from all sides. The image of the cruel pirate gave way to a complex being, shaped by hardship. The bay was surrounded by cliffs of strange shapes. Old sailors said that these rocks had served as landmarks for the first navigators. Their presence told an ancient story, made of adventures, promises, and tragedies. Maelis felt that her own story was gently adding itself to these forgotten tales. Ilyan watched Maelis with caution. The attraction he felt grew despite the risks. In a world where alliances shifted with the storms, he feared letting his emotions weaken his vigilance. Yet he could not ignore the new place she was taking in his mind. That night, an invisible bond was woven between them. It was not yet a declared love. It was a mutual understanding born of survival, loss, and shared silence. The sea, relentless, continued to roll against the cliffs as if it approved this fragile birth of feelings. The Free Fleet advanced into a zone where maps lost all precision. Sailors spoke of a graveyard of ships, a vestige of ancient battles between the coalition and banished crews. The silence that reigned over these waters contrasted with the tension weighing on the deck. Dorian watched the wrecks scattered around the ship. Some hulls lay half-submerged, gnawed by salt. Others rested on the reefs like carcasses frozen in time. These ruins evoked the sacrifices of forgotten sailors, victims of the continent's ambitions and of pirate brutality. The elders spoke of these places as haunted zones. They reminded everyone that each abandoned ship carried within it the memory of a final battle. Dorian felt his breathing tighten. He imagined his father among these specters, lost in a battle whose truth no one knew. The captain ordered reduced speed. The irregular seabed made every movement risky. The Free Fleet had modernized its ships with reinforced hulls, but no technology fully protected against the treacheries of the sea. Dorian watched the sailors maneuver with silent precision. As they moved forward, the debris became more numerous. Ropes floated between the waves. Broken masts pointed toward the sky like warnings. This sight awakened Dorian's rage. He saw in every wreck further proof of the cruelty of the Pirate King. The crew felt his inner agitation. Gazes turned toward him. Some recognized in these emotions a dangerous force. The sea had often turned anger into recklessness. Dorian fought this inner turmoil, but each fragment of wreckage seemed to feed the blaze he carried. As the ship left the densest area, Dorian remained for a long time on the aft deck. The wind dispersed the heavy smell of rotting wood. These specters of the sea seemed to whisper a dark truth. His quest was not only personal, it was part of a broader cycle of war and loss. That day, Dorian understood that vengeance would not erase the ocean's ghosts. Yet he knew he would not turn back. Every wreck encountered strengthened his desire to defy the Pirate King, even if this path was to engulf him like so many before him. Ilyan's flotilla continued its course westward, carried by steady winds. Recent alliances gave the whole a new stability. Maelis observed each ship as a piece of a fragile whole. She understood that these crews, once isolated, now formed a force capable of defying the coalition. The days spent at sea brought Maelis and Ilyan closer. Their bond grew through daily gestures. She shared the responsibilities on board and learned the navigation techniques specific to independence. This knowledge was based on experience rather than on the rigid methods of the continent. Ilyan found himself seeking her presence. She brought a form of calm that years of flight had stolen from him. Her determination to find her place in this new world revealed an inner strength he admired. This admiration gradually became a deeper feeling, difficult to ignore. One evening, as the flotilla sheltered behind a high wall of reefs, they remained on deck to monitor the movement of the current. The sea glowed with a pale light. Maelis felt Ilyan's hand brush against hers. This simple gesture revealed what their silences had long concealed. The region they were crossing was known as a space of transition between coalition waters and those of the former Corsair territory. Exposed rocks and scattered islets formed a natural barrier that only experienced sailors knew how to cross. Ilyan used his knowledge to guide their route. Maelis understood that their bond went beyond simple necessity. In this hostile environment, their emotions intertwined with the daily struggle. The breath of the wind, the roll of the ship, and constant vigilance gave rise to an intimacy neither of them had anticipated. Their destinies seemed to intertwine naturally. When the night grew darker, Ilyan confessed what he felt. His words were simple and direct. Maelis felt a new warmth fill her heart. She realized that love could be born even at the edges of the world, where laws no longer applied and where only human bonds mattered. Thus their couple was born, not in abundance or safety, but at the heart of a silent struggle against the tyranny of the pirate king. Their union gave new breath to the flotilla. Each ship felt this change, as if a discreet hope rose with them upon the ocean. The Free Fleet was now approaching areas controlled by the pirate coalition. The sailors recognized the familiar signs. The wind carried a more metallic scent. The currents grew irregular. These waters had been shaped by years of battles between opposing factions. Dorian felt a new agitation spreading through the ship. Officers sharpened their strategies. Recruits tightened the rigging and checked the weapons. The entire vessel vibrated with tense energy. The sea itself seemed to hold its breath, aware of the imminent clash. When the first enemy sails appeared, the crew moved into position. It was a group of fast ships, characteristic of the coalition. They used light hulls and dark sails to surprise their opponents. Their approach was direct and resolute. The Free Fleet engaged without hesitation. Cannons spewed clouds of white smoke that drifted with the wind. Dorian took part in the maneuvers with renewed intensity. His movements were precise. Each order rang out with the confidence of a sailor forged by rage and training. Enemy fire struck the hull, hurling splinters of wood across the deck. The sailors shielded themselves as best they could, but refused to yield. Their ship, built using the mixed techniques of the New World, withstood the assault better than those of the old fleets of the Coalition or the continent. As the ships closed in, the battle grew more brutal. Grappling hooks were thrown, and the decks nearly touched. Flames began to lick the rigging. Cries blended with the clash of weapons. Dorian stood at the heart of the chaos, driven by a determination that surpassed his fear. One of the enemy ships eventually caught fire after a precise shot from the Free Fleet. The flames spread rapidly, lighting the sea with a red glow. The coalition attempted to withdraw, but several of its vessels remained trapped by fire and the waves that swallowed them. When silence returned, Dorian became aware of what he had accomplished. He was no longer a mere novice. He had faced the coalition and survived. The crew's respect was visible in their eyes, yet he felt no sense of victory. In this battle, he saw only another step toward his revenge. Ilyan's flotilla was moving westward, but a new tension settled among the ships. The sailors sensed that their course was nearing the most dangerous borders of the coalition. The winds grew more violent and the seabirds disappeared, a sign that the great fleets were not far away. Maelis watched Ilyan with growing concern. For several days he spoke less and spent hours scanning the horizon. His determination to confront the Pirate King seemed to outweigh every other consideration. Even the allies recently gathered were beginning to perceive this obsession. She dreamed of a different future. The quiet bays of the New World remained etched in her mind. She imagined a life far from battle, a refuge where the sea would no longer be a battlefield. Yet she also understood that this dream would only be possible after the tyrant's fall. During a stop in an isolated cove, Maelis tried to speak to him. She spoke of their future, the dangers awaiting them, and the fragility of their alliance. Ilyan listened to her, but his gaze remained drawn to the distant waters. His vengeance had become a compass that guided each of his choices. The sailors felt this tension. They had joined Ilyan to challenge the coalition, but the idea of pushing ever deeper into enemy territory worried them. Some whispered that their flotilla was not ready. Others believed they had nothing left to lose. Maelis understood that her dilemma went beyond simple fear. She had to choose between following Ilyan into an uncertain war or protecting the life she now carried within her. This secret weighed heavily on her heart. She knew that revealing it could change the course of their voyage. The ocean offered no answer. The waves seemed indifferent to their hesitation. Yet Maelis felt that every future decision brought Ilyan closer to the moment when he would face the Pirate King. And she feared that this confrontation might carry away everything they had built together. That night, while the flotilla slept, Maelis remained alone on the deck. The moonless sky reflected the same uncertainty that inhabited her mind. She understood that their future depended on a choice Ilyan might not be ready to make. The flotilla advanced toward almost mythical waters. The sailors spoke of the legend of the West, an old rumor describing a preserved land beyond the known zones. Some said it welcomed those fleeing wars. Others claimed it was only an illusion born from storms. Maelis listened to these tales with attention. This distant land represented for her the possibility of a future without fear. She imagined a peaceful shore, far from the coalition and the continent. A fragile yet persistent image that slipped into her thoughts despite the dangers surrounding them. Ilyan remained unmoved by these stories. His path sought neither refuge nor tranquility. He moved forward with a cold determination, focused on the vengeance he had carried since his exile. The legend was, in his eyes, only a mirage meant to divert sailors from their struggle. The flotilla's allies nevertheless spoke with enthusiasm about those lands. Some saw in them an opportunity to rebuild. Others hoped to escape the grip of the Pirate King. These exchanges revealed the latent need for hope, even a distant one, in a world shaped by violence. The ocean seemed to change as they advanced. The currents grew warmer and the islands rarer. The elders said these signs marked the approach of a zone still little explored. Yet the dangers remained omnipresent. The coalition patrols sought to isolate any attempt at unity among the exiles. Maelis understood that two opposing visions were emerging between her and Ilyan. She saw the West as a promise. He saw only the road leading to his enemy. This divergence revealed a new fragility in their union, a tension that grew in the silence of the nights. One evening, the flotilla glimpsed a long band of mist forming on the horizon. Some saw it as a sign of the legend, others felt a warning. Maelis felt her heart beat faster. This mysterious boundary represented everything she desired and everything Ilyan still refused to see. The sea remained indecipherable. It carried within it the dreams of those who crossed it and the anger of those who defied it. For Maelis, the West was becoming a possible direction. For Ilyan, it was only a distraction. Between them, the legend was beginning to draw an invisible line. Ilyan's flotilla was now approaching the most dangerous regions of the ocean. The winds changed direction abruptly, and the sailors felt a constant pressure, a sign that the coalition patrols were drawing nearer. Each day seemed to lead them a little closer to an inevitable confrontation. Maelis lived this voyage in growing tension. She felt her body changing. The nausea, the fatigue, and the irregular beating of her heart betrayed a secret she could no longer ignore. She was carrying a new life. This discovery overturned her vision of the world and of their future. She watched Ilyan for a long time before finding the strength to speak. He stood near the helm, focused on the treacherous currents that bordered their course. His face bore the mark of a man moving forward despite doubt, driven by a vengeance that had accompanied him for too many years. When she told him of her pregnancy, the silence seemed to envelop the entire ship. Ilyan remained motionless, as if struck by a truth he had never imagined. Maelis saw in his gaze a mixture of joy, fear, and uncertainty. He suddenly understood that his struggle no longer concerned only his own life. The crew quickly sensed this invisible change. The sailors, accustomed to reading the emotions of their captains, felt a new hesitation in Ilyan. Some saw it as weakness. Others understood that a child could transform a war into a personal and fragile destiny. Maelis spoke of her dream of a refuge in the West. She evoked peaceful lands, far from the battles that tore the seas apart. She imagined a home for this child, a protected place where the sea would no longer dictate their lives. Ilyan listened to her, but his gaze remained fixed on the route leading to the Pirate King. This announcement became a silent turning point. It revealed the two possible paths. One led to war against the coalition. The other offered a fragile hope, almost unreal, yet deeply human. Between these two roads, Ilyan suddenly found himself unable to choose. The sea continued its indifferent rolling, yet Maelis knew that nothing would ever be the same again. This unborn child became a light in the darkness, a reminder that some battles are not won by strength, but by the ability to protect what is born in the very heart of chaos. The Free Fleet was approaching the outer lines of the coalition. These waters had been charted long ago, yet they constantly changed under the pressure of conflict. Sailors knew that crossing this invisible boundary meant entering the territory of the Pirate King, a domain controlled with relentless precision. Dorian stood near the bow. The wind lashed his face and carried the scent of burned algae. The elders used to say that this smell announced the nearness of great fleets. Each wave seemed to draw them closer to a fate he felt had been carved into him since childhood. The captain gathered the crew. He explained that the objective was clear. The Free Fleet had to destabilize enemy routes and open a passage toward the internal waters of the coalition. These zones were defended by fast ships trained to surround their opponents and cut off any retreat. Dorian sensed a new tension in the air. The ship vibrated under the force of the wind, but also under the weight of expectation. He understood that this deployment was not a simple mission. It was the beginning of a larger offensive that would sooner or later lead to the confrontation he had always dreamed of. The sailors reinforced the sails and checked the weapons. The protective devices of the New World, rare and precious components, were tested with care. This hybrid technology combined the artisanal knowledge of the old independent pirates with the innovations of the smiths from the distant continent. The sea grew rougher as they neared the east. Currents tightened around the shoals. The ships of the Free Fleet had to maneuver with precision. Dorian took part in the adjustments and guided the recruits, revealing an ease that surprised even the most experienced officers. Far away, a dark line marked the presence of other vessels. No one yet knew whether it was a patrol or an entire fleet. Simply seeing them was enough to remind the crew that they were no longer in the waters of the New World, but within the direct sphere of the Pirate King. When night fell, Dorian remained alone at the front of the ship. The moon traced a pale path across the waves. He knew that heading east was a point of no return. Before him stretched the territories where his destiny would intertwine with that of an enemy he had never seen yet had hated all his life. Ilyan's flotilla remained motionless across a vast expanse of calm waters. Silence weighed upon every ship. The sailors waited for a decision that was slow to come. They knew Maelis' announcement had shaken their captain, even if he showed nothing. The tension was becoming almost palpable. Ilyan spent long hours watching the horizon. He seemed torn between two forces, each pulling at his soul. On one side, the unborn child called for caution and protection. On the other, the vengeance he had nurtured for years drove him to confront the Pirate King without delay. Maelis felt this silent fracture. She saw the fatigue in his movements and the hardness in his gaze. She tried to speak to him, but Ilyan remained closed off, locked in an inner conflict he could not share. Their love, still new, was threatened by this invisible struggle. One morning, before the sun pierced the mist, Ilyan made his decision. He knew he could no longer draw Maelis into this fight. The child to come changed everything. Vengeance remained his burden, but he refused to condemn his family to a fate of flight and violence. He then gathered part of the flotilla. Only 30 ships would follow the direct route toward the central waters of the coalition. The others would protect Maelis and remain at a distance, ready to make for safer lands if the situation required it. It was the only way to reconcile his two destinies. Maelis understood this choice when she saw him preparing his ship. Her heart tightened. She tried one last time to convince him to stay, but Ilyan could not give it up. He carried too many scars, too many silent dead in his wake. His path called to him, even if it had to tear them apart. When the 30 ships left the flotilla, an immense emptiness fell upon Maelis. She stood motionless on the deck, watching the sails drift slowly toward a horizon heavy with threats. She knew Ilyan was most likely walking toward his own death. The ocean itself seemed to hold its breath. Thus began his departure. A choice born of love and vengeance. A solitary path where Ilyan would go to challenge a king no one had ever defeated. Maelis remained behind him, bearing their fragile future, while the waves slowly erased the silhouette of the man she loved. In the central waters of the coalition, Ilyan advanced with the 30 ships that had agreed to follow him. These vessels were the fastest of the flotilla, designed to maneuver between enemy patrols. The sea itself seemed to change around them, carrying a heavy tension that foretold imminent danger. As they progressed, the sailors observed the signs typical of the territory of the Pirate King. The waters grew darker, and the currents pulled at the hulls as if seeking to slow their advance. Such phenomena were known to accompany the great fleets of the tyrant. Ilyan remained motionless at the prow. His silhouette seemed carved from rage. He knew that the pirate king was somewhere in these waters, protected by swift and disciplined ships. This invisible presence fed within him an ancient anger, ready to erupt at the slightest sign. The watch intensified. The sailors scanned the horizon in search of black sails. The elders said that the king's fleet never moved as a whole. It appeared in small units, striking by surprise, using speed to isolate a target before destroying it completely. Then they sighted a banner, a dark standard marked with a symbol Ilyan knew all too well. Every sailor felt his heart tighten. No ship other than the king's dared to bear that mark. The enemy Ilyan had pursued for so many years had finally appeared. The air seemed to freeze around them. The silhouette of the royal vessel took shape, larger than the others. Its sides bore the scars of ancient battles. The power emanating from it revealed the hand of a merciless commander, absolute master of the inner seas of the coalition. Ilyan felt his blood run cold. This ship was not a simple target. It was the embodiment of everything he hated. The shadow of his exile, the destruction of his crew, and the years of flight suddenly took on a real form. Hatred became a burning weight in his chest. The wind rose abruptly, lifting the sails and announcing the imminence of conflict. The sailors took their positions without a word. Ilyan placed his hand upon the railing, aware that this encounter would change the course of his life. The pirate king stood directly before him. The confrontation was now inevitable. The battle against the royal ship erupted with blinding violence. Ilyan's ships hurled themselves into the fray like cornered predators. The cannons roared. The masts trembled under the force of the impacts. Every sailor knew that this battle would decide the fate of all the exiles of the ocean. Ilyan launched his assault when the hulls almost touched. The decks were covered in smoke. The royal ship rose like a floating fortress, defended by veterans loyal to the king of the pirates. This tyrant commanded his men with an icy voice, the symbol of an absolute authority that crushed the independent. The fighting tightened around them. The waves splashed across the planks reddened by blood. Ilyan advanced with fierce determination, driven by years of flight, loss, and silence. Every step brought him closer to the man he had sworn to bring down. The sea itself seemed to hold its breath around them. When the two men finally faced one another, the roar of battle almost faded away. In the king's eyes, Ilyan saw an ancient cruelty shaped by domination and fear. He understood that this man would never retreat. Their destinies had been bound since the first day of his exile. The duel was brief and brutal. The wood of the deck was stained with blood. Their blades clashed beneath a cloudless sky. Ilyan finally gained the advantage, carried by a strength born of every injustice he had suffered. The king of the pirates fell at last, leaving behind a silence as heavy as a verdict. The sailors of the coalition stepped back, shaken by the death of their master. In the old traditions, the one who killed the king had to take his place to prevent immediate chaos. Power, passed on through violence, moved from one hand to another, like a debt impossible to refuse. Ilyan felt the weight of this coronation fall upon his shoulders. He did not desire this throne, but he knew that refusing would condemn Maelis, their unborn child, and all the exiles who had followed him. He accepted the role, not out of ambition, but out of necessity. Thus, he became the new king of the pirates, a sovereign forged by exile, love, and war. Deep within his heart, he already knew that this power would be a burden. Yet he lifted his head, aware that a new order had just been written upon the ocean. 20 years had passed since Ilyan's coronation. The ocean had changed. Tensions between the continent, the pirate coalition, and the New World had reached a critical point. Sea routes had become zones of constant surveillance, where every lookout feared the beginning of a major confrontation. Dorian commanded a leading ship of the Free Fleet. His name was spoken with respect along the coasts of the New World. He watched the horizon without rest. For him, this war was only a necessary passage toward a single objective. It brought him closer to the king of the pirates he dreamed of killing. Farther away, columns of smoke revealed a battle already underway. The red sails of the continent clashed with the dark sails of the coalition. These two forces had opposed one another for generations. Under Ilyan's authority, the coalition continued to block access to the routes leading to the New World. The Free Fleet approached cautiously. Its swift ships advanced through unstable currents. Opposite them, the coalition followed Ilyan's orders without knowing his true intentions. Some captains, convinced they were defending their borders, sometimes attacked the Free Fleet without understanding that their enemies were not the ones they imagined. These confrontations came from an ancient misunderstanding. The coalition sought above all to prevent the continent from expanding. The Free Fleet believed it was being targeted directly. Each side thought it was protecting its lands. None realized that they were in truth fighting the same threat, drawn into an unintentional war. Dorian then distinguished the massive silhouettes of the great ships of the coalition. These vessels were described as the moving walls of the ocean. Their mission remained unchanged. They barred the continent's path with unshakable determination, faithful to the plan Ilyan had conceived 20 years earlier. Then, a ship separated from the chaos. Larger, darker, it advanced with a cold assurance, its black sails edged with gold cut through the smoke. Its hull bore the marks of countless battles. There was no doubt. It was the royal ship, the ship of the king of the pirates. Dorian's blood ran cold. All his life he had waited for this moment. That ship embodied his hatred, his wounds, and the shadow of a vanished father. Without hesitation, he turned his vessel toward the black and gold banner, ignoring the warnings of his officers. Around him, the sea was ablaze. Shots crossed. The continent pushed its lines. The coalition tightened its grip. At the heart of this turmoil, Dorian moved forward, guided by an obsession forged since childhood. He saw only the pirate king, the one he had come to kill. For 20 years, Ilyan had ruled the pirate coalition with a cold determination. His power had not been born of ambition, but of necessity. He had accepted the throne to maintain order after the death of his predecessor. That choice had condemned him to a deep solitude, masked by authority. The coalition respected his strength. His captains obeyed without knowing his secret motivations. To them, he remained an implacable sovereign who protected their borders. They did not know that every battle against the continent answered a personal mission. Ilyan defended the New World in silence, to preserve the family he had left behind. The years of rule had shaped a distant man. He carried the weight of every decision. Fallen ships, sacrificed crews, and fragile alliances formed a burden he shared with no one. Even victories seemed hollow, as if they reminded him of everything he had lost. The ongoing battle revived his doubts. He watched the sea from the deck of his royal ship. Smoke almost concealed the horizon. He knew this battle differed from the previous ones. It carried a new tension, as if the forces of the ocean were aligning for a decisive moment. His crew remained focused. The sailors knew the continent's tactics and could anticipate the first movements. The royal ship, massive and stable, advanced slowly between the waves, yet Ilyan felt an inexplicable unease. Something was approaching, a presence he could not name. He did not suspect that this presence came from the New World. A young man moved toward him, carried by rage and pain. Ilyan did not imagine that his path would cross that of his own son. He did not know that the child he had abandoned 20 years earlier had become a determined sailor. Amid the thunder of gunfire, Ilyan felt a familiar tightening. A memory of Maelis, of his departure, of the child he had never seen grow. These thoughts he tried to bury returned like unpredictable waves. They disturbed his judgment and reminded him of the price of his choices. The ocean, witness to his battles, seemed to hold its breath. Ilyan raised his eyes toward the approaching ships. He still did not know that this battle would decide his destiny. The burden of the throne had never been so heavy, and in the distance advanced the silhouette of the ship that would reveal the truth he had fled for 20 years. Dorian's ship advanced through the chaos of gunfire. Waves struck the hull as if announcing an inevitable fate. At the center of this storm, he saw only one goal. The royal ship stood before him, bearer of all the wounds that had marked his childhood. When the hulls collided, a dull crash shook the decks. Dorian leapt toward the enemy vessel, crossing the burning smoke. His heart beat to the rhythm of his vengeance. Each step led him toward the one he considered the author of his pain. Nothing could stop him now. Ilyan stood at the center of the deck, a dark silhouette in the powder fog. He watched the young man approaching, without knowing who he was. To him, this fighter was only another adversary, shaped by the violence of the seas. No intuition yet revealed the truth. The duel burst forth suddenly, swift and brutal. Blades struck steel in a violent rhythm. Dorian attacked with the accumulated rage of a lifetime. He believed he was facing his father's murderer. Every movement carried the weight of a past inherited and never questioned. Ilyan parried the blows with a precision born of decades of combat. Then a detail caught his attention. Around Dorian's neck, a pendant gleamed beneath the flashes of light. Ilyan recognized its shape. It was Maelis's, a symbol he had never forgotten despite the years. A freezing shock ran through Ilyan. His gaze slipped to his own chest where the second pendant hung, twin to the first. He understood. The young man before him carried the legacy of their lost love. An inexorable truth imposed itself. This fighter was his son, raised far from him. Ilyan stepped back and felt his strength leave him. In a breath almost torn away by pain, he spoke Maelis's name while staring at Dorian's pendant. The word passed his lips like a final confession, laden with everything he had never been able to say. As he fell, his jacket opened and revealed his own pendant. Dorian saw it. The same pattern, the same shape, the same notch meant to join his. The spoken name, the fixed gaze upon the object, everything became clear. The truth struck him like an icy wave. Dorian understood that he had killed his father. No return was possible. The deck around him seemed to fade. The two pendants, united by chance, revealed what the sea had hidden too long. His vengeance had just destroyed the only person who could have brought him peace. The battle gradually drifted away, as if the sea itself refused to disturb the moment. Dorian remained motionless near Ilyan's body. The wind gently pulled at the sails while the waves slid along the hull. Silence had settled, heavier than cannon smoke. Around him, the sailors watched the scene without understanding. The pirate king had fallen, yet no cry of victory rose from the deck. Dorian felt neither triumph nor relief. His breathing remained locked. The truth had closed around him like an inner storm. The pendant Ilyan wore still glimmered faintly. Its shape perfectly completed Dorian's. This symbol, ignored for so many years, revealed a story no one had told him. He now understood his anger had had no foundation. His enemy had never been the one he believed. The sea seemed to listen to his pain. The waves carried the scent of salt and ashes. Dorian suddenly grasped the magnitude of his actions. He had killed the man who had tried in secret to protect the new world. He had shattered a destiny that had never sought to harm his own. The crew of the Free Fleet kept their distance, aware no words could soothe this moment. Dorian touched his father's pendant. He found a discreet mark there, the same one Maelis had engraved on his own. A simple gesture that confirmed a truth impossible to alter. But while he lived this revelation, a hostile gaze settled upon him. The son of one of Ilyan's lieutenants stood at the stern of the deck. His face was fixed in a mixture of hatred and pain. He too understood what had just happened, and he already named a culprit. To this man, Dorian was not a lost son. He was the assassin of the king he had sworn to serve. His anger took root in the same misunderstanding that had once fueled Dorian's own. A new hatred had just been born, silent yet inevitable. The sea, indifferent to human destinies, continued its motion. The wind dried the blood upon the deck as if erasing the traces of the drama. Dorian then understood what the elders meant. On the ocean, vengeance had neither end nor master. It always returned, carried by salt and waves. The cycle never truly ended. On the ocean, every act became a ripple calling another, and men repeated the same errors while believing they repaired them. The sea did not judge. It merely reflected their choices.